please tell us a little bit about the program, the results, the feedback, and what is it that you plan to do in the future?
So as our chairwoman said, there is sort of, what the cannabis industry is going to look like in New York. The 9 license types and all the regulations that go along with that, and how it's going to look in the long run. Based conditional program. So the program that you're talking about was, our first effort in providing some structure and information to people in the hopes that they would apply for licenses and join the regulated market. So for instance, in that program, which was the Cannabis Compliance Training and Mentorship Program, CCTM, we had a number of folks teaching the various cohorts that were participating in that program. So we had accountants, we had attorneys who specialize in cannabis, we had professors who specialize in ag business from SUNY Morrisville, we had professors from Cornell come in both on the employment side and on the ag side. And most importantly, we had the initial conditional cultivators, so the first licensed adult use cultivators in the state, and the first adult use conditional processors in the state take on the role of teacher to tell folks, what it's like being in a regulated marketplace. So now I'll tell you about the cohorts and why all that matters. The cohorts were, we had a lengthy application process to get into this program. It was vital that the application process was anonymized. The people that we wanted to come into this program, there was 4 cohorts. Legacy cultivators who wanted to go into the regulated marketplace, legacy processors who wanted to go into the regulated marketplace, traditional farmers who wanted to add cannabis to their crops or switch over completely to cannabis, and people who had prior experience in food and beverage processing. So to get the legacy side of things to come forward, we had to promise that, we're a government agency and we need you to tell us your story, because we were looking for the most experienced people out of all that applied. The people who have the most experience growing, I'll be frank with you. And without paying attention to legacy growers, forget about it. It's like, we're not introducing cannabis to New York State. It exists, and to not acknowledge that and establish a path forward for legacy cultivators, legacy processors is, from a market perspective, just not smart. But also from a justice perspective, not smart. From an ethical perspective, not okay. So we went for it. And we talked to legacy folks all over the state, and we said, why don't you apply to this program that we're building? And they laughed us out of the room. And then eventually, meeting after meeting, the trust built up, and we anonymized the application. They get a ton of information they need, so they're encouraged to take the next step. I can't say more than that because the regulations aren't out yet, but we have to make room for folks that are already in this business. So that is really what that program was about. And the second program that we stood up is a high-intensity boot camp style Accelerator program for all of the people getting those initial retail licenses. And that launched on March 17th. We can get to that later.
Just can you speak about New Jersey Business Action Center and Cannabis Training Academy?
Sure. So hi, everybody. So by way of introduction, my name is Jessica Gonzalez, and I operate in a couple of spheres in the cannabis industry. So on the private side, I am an attorney. I deal with intellectual property and compliance work. I am also a consultant on the government side of things. So I was selected as the inaugural consultant to build out the Cannabis Training Academy for the state of New Jersey with the New Jersey Business Action Center. I also operate in the academia space, so I'm also an adjunct professor. I teach at 2 colleges, and I teach the history of cannabis and a cannabis policy and development course. And of course, on the advocacy side, I started out as an advocate. I was the head of the Social Impact Committee for NJCAN. That was a coalition that pushed legalization forward in New Jersey, and it was the most successful cannabis legalization campaign in the country. And my role being part of that coalition was to make sure the conversation stayed on equitable legalization, to make sure that our policies and our laws had social equity as the nucleus of its policies and not an afterthought as we saw in other states. And one thing that I really need to mention, because we talked about the CREAM Act, which is the statute that legalized adult use in Jersey, I also helped lead a small cohort of advocates from around the country to stop the adult use bill from going forward when it was in its current iteration, because it was hard. And it hardly had any social equity provisions in there, even though it was touted as a social equity bill. And so we were very successful in that aspect. One of the things that I advocated for, along with my cohort of advocates, was for technical assistance. We saw from other states that you can have all this pretty language and statute, pretty language and regulations, but if people are not educated about it, if the application is so hard to bypass, if the municipal process is so hard to bypass, we are not going to achieve the goals that we set forth. So the fact that I now get to lead this technical assistance program with New Jersey is pretty unreal, because I became exactly who I advocated to see. So sometimes things like that happen. So what the Cannabis Training Academy is with the New Jersey Business Action Center, if those who are not familiar with the agency, it's actually a business advocacy agency. So it really makes sense that they would be tasked with this very enormous ask to build out a training academy for the entire state. So I've been working on it along with my contractor, who's Kelly Wyman over here. Kelly's a consultant in the cannabis space. She's dealt with licenses in over 27 different states, over 250 licenses. The reason why I want to point that out is because while I bring the community aspect, the education aspect, the advocacy aspect, it was really important to also understand what happened in other states where things went wrong. So our Cannabis Training Academy is built on 3 pillars. It is to empower the community, it is to educate prospective applicants, and it is to establish new businesses. So we're really going to be remedying a couple of hurdles in the cannabis space. One is the access to education. We all read headlines all the time, and no offense to the news reporters, in here, but a lot of times, and the way that I tell my students is, you have to look under the hood. You have to question what is being reported, because a lot of times, you just have these really sexy headlines, but the content isn't exactly true or biased. So you really need to understand and educate yourself in that way. So people have come to us and told me, I don't know what's going on in New Jersey. Things are really confusing. Regulations are changing. What is this statute? What's happening on the municipal level? So we're going to provide that education. The other obstacle is access to professional service providers. One thing that we really want to establish is we want people to have access to professional service providers. We are ourselves, our jobs as lawyers and as accountants, it's a barrier to entry to get to us, right? We have a very particular skill set. We demand a certain price. We do whatever it is that we can do to lower that barrier to entry. But regardless, it's still a high barrier to entry. And if you're somebody like myself, I'm an immigrant. I grew up in an impact zone, Jersey City Heights. I didn't grow up with lawyers. I didn't grow up with accountants. I didn't grow up with consultants. So who am I supposed to ask? Where do I find somebody that I can trust? So we're going to be bringing on professional service providers to be educators who are going to be properly vetted. And what this is going to help is to insulate against predatory practices that I see left and right in this space. So by having educators who've been properly vetted, who've been successful in their respective field, and more importantly, who can teach, those are the types of folks we're going to be bringing on. The other obstacle that we are going to be looking to build and bridge is access to mentorship as well. So students are going to have access to not just education, and not just professional service providers as educators, but also mentors as well, who have gone through their process of licensing and opening up a business, so they can have somebody that they can really speak to. We're building out right now 10 levels of education encompassing over 60 courses. This will be asynchronous, it will be video, which will be on demand. And the reason why is, we don't know who's going to want to participate in this program. They may be somebody who are working 2-3 jobs. They don't have time to go to a classroom. They don't have time to sit there and listen to me for an hour and a half. So we're going to make sure that a lot of this education is accessible, so that if you have a 15-minute break, you can watch a video, you can look at a supplementary material, and then you can take your quizzes along the way to keep achieving those certain levels. So that's part of the education that we're building. The professional service providers as the educators who are going to come on, providing that education and providing monthly Q&As. So you're going to have access to a human as well, where you're going to be able to ask questions to, and the same thing with the mentors.
That's amazing. My favorite word is mentorship and mentor, because this is something that all of us need to succeed. somebody who has the experience, and somebody who's willing to help. And I'm curious, James, is there a similar initiative in New York with respect to creating an equivalent of NJ Business Action Center? What are the plans for New York?
Right now, for the initial retail licensees, every single one of them is enrolled in our Accelerator program. Our Accelerator program is a super deep dive into everything involving cannabis retail. Everything from inventory to security to finances to insurance to whatever. This was, we hired educators from out of the state to come in and bring this program. They have an enormous list of mentors. And so each one of our cannabis retailers, when they get their license, is also, as they participate in this program, going to get a one-on-one mentor. And that mentor has to have owned or operated at least one cannabis retail business. They also get a team of financial analysts who really help people with their pro formas. Something you'd have to pay someone $10,000 or $20,000 to do on the open market, they can get their actual real-time projections in place because obviously they have to do a raise. They have to look for money. Those pro formas have to be perfect. No one really knows what they are, and we're teaching folks how to do that. So they have their consultants in that and in marketing. They have their, workshops. They have their weekly minimum meetings with their mentors. And so we really feel like we're setting up all of our initial cannabis licensees to have the support that they need. Now we have to pay attention to building out the services that are super important, a lot of which you mentioned, for all the licenses as they roll out. Not being able to navigate the application process can't be the reason why people don't come into this industry. And so we will be providing substantial one-on-one statewide resources so people can get help with that application process. We have a social and economic equity plan coming out in the next few weeks where all this is laid out in detail. So I can't say that much about it right now, but I can just say that business supports, wherever you are in your process of building your business, we want to have an entry point, and we're building centers throughout the state that will allow those multiple entry points. So if you're just getting started, you need some general business education services, there's a place to go. If you're getting into the cannabis business, there'll be specialized business services to help you build out your business plan there. In terms of incubation, obviously we're considering a number of models, for on-site incubation, what people would think of as apprenticeship in the production and retail space, or really just also apprenticeship, in the cultivation space as well. And we're going to do all of this regionally. So each region, in terms of the 10 economic regions of New York State, will have its own center. We want everybody who has this dream to apply when they're ready.
And I think we're definitely talking a lot about applications, right? And our first iteration of our program will be taking everybody through the application process from, hey, what kind of license do I want? What type of applicant are you applying for? And then taking them through that process. But one thing that I really want to reiterate for these state programs is something that I actually heard when I went to a meeting for the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition. And Dr. Imani Brown, who is the director of the Social Equity Program in LA, said something that was really, really powerful. She said, I wanted to be complicit in generational wealth. Sadly, we were complicit in generational debt. And the reason for that is because in their program, in the first iteration, they did not highlight the challenges of this industry. So while these programs are meant to encourage applicants, it's really meant to empower people with the knowledge that they need to make good business decisions. And one success metric is going to be when at the end of the program, you decide maybe, you know what? It's not for me. It's not for me right now. Maybe I'm going to enter through a different way. Maybe I'm going to go do something else for a little bit. Maybe I'll do this part-time until I can see some barriers to entry being lowered. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind because we do try to push a lot of rhetoric is applications. And while at the state level, I think New Jersey has done a tremendous job, and I'm going to say it outright, There's not a big enough of a conversation happening about how well New Jersey is doing at the state level. On the municipal level, that's a completely different scenario. But at the state level, a lot of the programs that they promise, a lot of the priority process that they promise is actually happening. But with this program, I want to keep in mind that I'm trying to build here a very educated base and trying to build more advocates. Because the more education you have, the better you're going to be able to come up with solutions in policy. And a lot of times, those who are applying for these types of licenses and those who work with applicants, they may come to you and say, hey, I want to apply for this. You write my business plan. You come up with my vision. You prepare my financial reports, right? Or not yet, exactly, right? And that's not really, our place. But what that tells me is you are not educated enough. You don't know the rules of the game you're asking to play. And that's dangerous, highly dangerous. So what we're trying to do with this program is educate you enough so that you can say, yes, I now have the tools and the knowledge. I can make an intentional decision about joining this industry or not for me. So it's really important, especially as professional providers, as policymakers, that we continue to highlight the challenges that this industry brings. That you may not be profitable for the first 3 to 5 years. Are you capitalized enough to operate at a loss for that amount of time? Your town may not support you. Your team may screw you over. Are you protected? All of these things happen so often. So part of our program is making sure that when we are bringing on instructors, that we're bringing on mentors. No offense to any adjunct professors or professors in here. I'm also one. But I'm not trying to bring in theory type people. I want to bring in people with real lived experience to educate these students. Because if not, if somebody asks you and you've never lived it, you may give a wrong response. You may be encouraging somebody who really should not be on this road, or maybe down the road they should be on it. So what we really want to do is vet them and make sure that we have experienced professionals. And when we were talking about legacy as well, we are not leaving out the legacy market at all. We actually have a very specific programming for legacy, where we're going to have legacy operators who have successfully transitioned from legacy to the regulated market to teach legacy operators. And why is that? They have a very different experience, a very different story, a very different path that somebody who's never been legacy can't speak to it.
Thank you, Jessica. Something you mentioned about education and the people getting into this industry. I noticed myself personally from the experience, people are coming to me, they start talking to me, and I realize they don't know how to run a business. They don't know how to even apply for the license or, okay, once I get the license, what's next? So I think what's important in the message that we're trying to deliver here is the education, understanding what you're getting yourself into, do your homework, prepare, and read the regulations, and use the resources that New York and New Jersey provides.